it more than what I would like for it to be.
We see reality according to our thought. Wherever you look, it's the product of thought. Buildings, farms, airplanes, everything, pollution. And therefore, thought is constantly participating both in giving shape and form and figuration to ourselves and to the whole of reality. Right?
I think reality, of course, this whole is interdependent. See, without, in order to exist something, one thing, one particular thing, see, without other factor, it cannot exist. So you see, everything related.
The faster, the quicker, the people in the developed countries are taught to understand that it is really in their interest to reduce poverty in the world, the faster our planet will be able to solve that issue.
How much change?
For the Tibetans, the Dalai Lama is Chenrezig, the Buddha of compassion. You need a sense of universal responsibility based on love and compassion has been the Dalai Lama's message ever since he fled from Tibet in 1959.
Deep down, you see, the Tibetan spirit very strong.
Much better. Quantum physicist and philosopher David Bohm was profoundly affected by his close contacts with both Einstein and J. Krishnamurti. Bohm's theory of wholeness and the implicate order states that there is something like life and mind enfolded in everything.
You can't, on one little ball, like the Earth, isolate yourself.
For influential artist Robert Rauschenberg, art is not half as interesting as life. Rauschenberg promotes international understanding and peace by exhibiting his own artworks in some of the most traveled places of the world. When not traveling, he spends his time working on the island of Captiva in Florida.
I recognize the fact that if we don't, we the living people right now don't pay attention to the total world. And so what we have to do is somehow establish a society, a successful society, that would somehow educate everyone in all parts of the land so that that they would realize that we're just on this little ball here, and everything that we do, because we have been very extravagant in our developments, that everything that we do makes a difference here and there and everywhere.
Well, you see, I think the difficulty is this fragmentation, first of all. Everybody is, all thought is broken up into bits, like this nation, this country, this industry, this profession, and so on, as they can't meet, right? And it's extremely hard to break into that. Now, the second, but that comes about primarily because thought has developed traditionally in a way such that it claims not to be affecting anything, but just telling you the way things are. Therefore, people cannot see that they are creating a problem and then apparently trying to solve it. That is, see, let's take the problem, what problem do you like? Pollution, or the ecology. See, the ecology is not in itself a problem. It works perfectly well by itself. It's due to us, right? It's a problem because we are thinking in a certain way by breaking everything up and each person's doing his own thing, right? Now, therefore, the ecological problem is due to thought, right? But thought thinks it is a problem out there and I must solve it. Now, that doesn't make sense because simultaneously thought is doing all the activities which make the problem and then does another set of activities to try to overcome it. You see, it doesn't stop doing the things which are making the ecological problem, right? or the national problem, or whatever the problem is.
Buddhists believe the oneself as a creator. So the future, the good or bad, entirely depend on present, our, shoulder. It entirely, depend on our own, present, behavior, or present action.
The earth is one household, really.
Yeah.
We're not treating it that way, right? So that's the first step in economics, is to say the earth is one household and all that it depends on. It's all one, you see. So now the implicate order would help us to see that, to see everything enfolds everything, that everybody not merely depends on everybody, but actually everybody is everybody in a deeper sense. See, we are the earth because all our substance comes from the earth and goes back. I mean, it's wrong to say it's an environment, you see, it's just surrounding us, because that would be like trying the brain regarding the stomach as part of its environment.
So you see, in order to change the external thing, first must change within ourselves. If we want, I think something like this, you see, if we want, beautiful garden, first, any human mind, make, let's say, some kind of blueprint or the imagination or vision. And then, according to that idea, then implement. Then the external things will materialize. So first must come in mind. So then, like that. So that's what we believe.
About, I put 2 meters, I think.
Never mind. Yeah, oh, they're awful.
All right,
The
thank you very
modern
much.
world wasn't like this at the Last Supper. Right, ladies and gentlemen, please, will you all take your seats?
The whole planet is changing in all its parts, including Western Europe, the United States, Japan, Tibet, India, the whole so-called third world. And it's not just a small change, it is a radical change, and it is a normal process. You cannot avoid the question whether the kind of society which exists now is coming to an end. Not only socialism, communism, whatever you call it, but also the Western type of society. No existing society is not only perfect at any given time, but the question is whether it is adequate. There's a lot of groping for power, fighting for power, a lot of cynicism. Now, and I'm thinking about our leaders, I think, why not bring in more intellectuals, scientists, spiritual leaders? I think that we should put in charge more people who are able to look far ahead, who are creative. I don't think it is so dangerous that these people are not professional politicians. I think it's quite good. And chances are that at least most of these people will be decent, particularly people of art, and I'm looking at Rauschenberg. These people, they come to understand quicker than others something that will happen in the future. They even may not know this, you know. But by what Rauschenberg was doing, you know, just spilling water and, you know, paintings. This is some sign of the future. He feels things that will be coming. He is the magician. He is the modern magician that shows these things.
Now we're waiting and the other colors set up.
How long does it take?
There? Well, you never know what they're going to do.
Yeah.
So it's like the erosion that I was talking about before. And I'm using that in my paintings now.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see the parallel.
When I started working on the brass, I thought that I might be accused of knowing more about what I was doing than I do. And so I've kept it very loose, that I'm anxious to find out what it could become.
Then, yeah.
More than what I would like for it to be.
So you're following the process.
I'm following the process, and the process is following me.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no separation. I mean, we are both bewildering each other. I'm giving them a kind of life that they never had before.
Yeah.
And so I'm recycling, you know,
Yeah,
the
you said that.
waste.
Yeah.
Whether I'm walking around the streets of New York City or Amsterdam. Actually, I did some nice works in Amsterdam, but it was, the city is so clean. It was difficult to find anything that was considered a waste.
Come back.
No,
there's
it's a
erosion.
waste.
There's erosion there too.
All right, I'll be there. I'll be there tomorrow.
Okay.
Or the root of the word compassion is say to feel together. And if people have the same feeling together and are responsible for each other, then you have compassion.
And you don't think it's part of, what's the word, original sin, that human beings in their very nature compete?
Well, I don't think that there is such thing as original sin, and I think it has developed more and more with the growth of our society. That there's no evidence that people in the hunter-gatherer society were all that competitive, but the more you made society big and you had organization and you had to get to the top, the people on the bottom would suffer. There was a drive to compete, naturally.
And do you think that perhaps the desire to compete is a weakness?
Not a weakness, that's a mistake.
Right.
I think that's one of the biggest dangers of that. I think that's what drives countries and nations apart. Is a sense of competition.
But are you competing, as it were, with yourself? Is that what the artist does? The satisfaction in the end is you reach what you were after.
No, my problem is how successfully can I change my mind again?
I always feel the compassion, not just mere sort of, the warm heart, but also, I think genuine compassion is something, there is a sense of responsibility. That's why I always trying to share my own experience. Whether they accept or not, it is something, that's something different matter. But I do feel if I explain something according to my own experience, that at least some people might get some new idea. And also, regarding relation between China and Tibet. So long, fear, the atmosphere of fear remain there, and distrust atmosphere there. Very difficult, impossible to develop mutual understanding, mutual respect, mutual trust. The time has come, their side must show the genuine conciliatory attitude. Now the best thing, first reduce their military forces and eventually create zone of peace. And this is the best way, concrete, or the convincing attitude towards Tibetan, we trust you. Here in India, the several occasions, I'm telling you, people, now we should have the democratic, government while I'm alive. That practice must implement, must materialize. So, I really want to be just a simple Buddhist monk. Anyway, it's a selfish motivation. Then I got genuine freedom. I don't want to have this kind of different title. That is my service always available. among Tibetan, in any human community. If I can do something, I always available. So long as my last breathing, I'm ready, wherever I can serve, including Chinese. As a human brothers and sisters, then is the official title as a temporal leader of Tibet, or government, head of the government, or even if it's the leader of spiritual, that kind of is a title. I feel sometimes that also is another hindrance for a closer relation with different people.
Thank you. That was most inspiring. In actual fact, there are interviews with each of the participants of the several events that you organized, Louwrien. And in recent times, I've been listening and watching and re-listening. And I thought it was quite addictive in actual fact to hear such wisdom, to hear not just science communication, but the most accomplished practitioners, scholars in various fields talking about their worldviews, about which they're not really that often asked. I was wondering how, where in other activities of my academic and artistic and normal life, I would come across such in-depth, wise conversations. And the only similarity that I could think of was a PhD viva. That is a kind of a genre of conversation where you aim for the best people to put a new project forward to. And to have that discussion about not just whether this thing ticks all the boxes and so on, but whether the researcher, the artist, art scientist has grown and what it all means for the world in a way. So I organize these kinds of things, these conversations, and it would be, my great pride if I managed to organize just a small section of this huge multiple event structure that you brought into the world in 1990. So what motivated you, since you're not my colleague at the UFA, but you're an artist, to do this? And how did you develop that vision, who to invite and so on? What kind of contribution is that? What place does it take in your practice?
Of course, this is not something that comes to your mind and that you do because you think of it. No, it is something that goes step by step. So at first, as we mentioned,
I can't hear you now all of a sudden. Yeah, no, maybe we have a problem with the plug of the microphone or something. It seems to be.
No. Oh,
Yeah. No,
oh.
try to continue on. Egon is attempting to rectify.
Is it better?
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Oh, lovely. Where did I leave off? It was when I said metal sculpture, mental sculpture. Yes. So then we are back in 1977. And I felt very clearly that I wanted to ask somebody.
No, it's not working again for me. Okay, now you're muted, and maybe you unmute again, and we'll see what it was that you were asking.
Spreken we weer?
Oh, now, okay, unmute, please. Yes, good. I think it's
Try again.
please.
It is, yes. Yeah, I felt like asking Joseph Beuys all the questions that I could think of. So he said that's okay, that is in 1978 that it starts. And we did these interviews at length, from one day to another, from 1 month to another. Then I made a little booklet, and Beuys said, oh, you should ask the same questions to Andy Warhol. Okay, it happened in Geneva. Again, a long interview, the longest that Warhol ever gave. And then at the end, Warhol said, oh, you should put these questions to the Dalai Lama. Because it was just in that time the Dalai Lama made his first visit to New York. And he had a long interview in Andy Warhol's interview. Only Rolling Stones and Andy Warhol's interview wrote about this visit of the Dalai Lama. So I want to say artists have a big step in how the Dalai Lama could enter into the news, the big world news. Then I went to Dharamsala to ask the questions to the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama said, oh, the German artist is right. He was very, very moved by what Beuys is saying. And his answers were very, very similar to the answers of Beuys. So I wrote a little note and I said, you have a brother here in the Himalayas, dear Joseph, you have a brother here in the Himalayas. He thinks exactly the same way about the problems of today as you do. And then after some time, I was back in Amsterdam and I phoned him up. He said, Louwrien, I want to make a permanent cooperation with the Dalai Lama to make Eurasia happen, and you have to do it. So yes, in Bonn, in 27 October 1982, the Dalai Lama and Beuys were meeting, and lots of people came. And Robert Filiou, the Fluxus artist who I had known for a long time in '64, he had put his, I had put my recorder on the table, and only much later I heard what people said, because people were sitting there and talking, and it was Robert Filiou who said, we should weave back together the three threads of art, science, and spirituality. He meant after this meeting, that should be our task. So it was not Beuys himself who suggested this, it was Robert Filiou. So I started to think or work on that. I found out there is a meeting of the Dalai Lama with scientists. It was in Graz in Austria. It was September 1983. Okay, I went with my car to Austria, Graz. One evening we were sitting there, the scientists, and we were eating. And they were having these meetings on stage with the Dalai Lama and other spiritual people. And then I started talking about Beuys and Warhol and Rauschenberg and artists. And Fridtjof Capra said, we've never seen these people, but they belong to our time. And I don't know why, but I said, oh, let's make art meet science and spirituality. That inspiration that Robert had given to me, Robert Filiou. So that is where it started. And then I started to work on it. And slowly, around the table at that point were David Bohm, Rupert Sheldrake, Francisco Varela, and Fritjof Capra. And Fritjof Capra said, well, you can invite us to your meetings, but if you don't bring in Ilya Prigozhin, we won't come, because he is the most important. So what is this thing about science, that why were these scientists sitting with the Dalai Lama? We have had linear science for a long time, but now we have chaotic science that came in around 1900, just as we had a big change in art. Those scientists that were sitting around that table were all scientists of the chaotic science. And they couldn't go with their questions to their own people. But they found out they can go to the Dalai Lama with their questions, and he has answers. So there was a natural coming together of all these things. It was magic.
Wonderful. Yeah, this is just inspirational, as Sharmila also put into the chat. Indeed, it seems so relevant. And when I listened to all these interviews that you conducted, several people were saying that in the late 80s and 1990, there was a crisis unfolding, an ecological crisis, of which not too many people at that time were speaking with the urgency that everybody needs to, address it with now. But when we're talking about 1989 had happened, the Cold War had ended, and a change in historical proportions was possible. And looking from the current vantage point, not just with the ecological crisis having worsened possibly beyond repair, and COVID having increased the fragmentation of which Bohm was speaking earlier, the crisis might be a little bit worse now. So do you think that similar approaches as 31 years ago would be timely now, or do you think that we're in a different kind of a moment when different analyses are necessary?
Well, I was thinking at that time, 88, 89, 87, I saw a glimpse of light. I had the idea, we can change something. We have a possibility to really get to that kind of world that Boyce has been speaking about, and that we all wanted, one peaceful world. So there was a huge enthusiasm. But in the beginning of the 90s, this was gone. So then the whole idea of something can be changed was no longer there. So then I always keep in mind that Boyce said in Japan, when he went to Japan in 1984, something that I had stimulated a lot because of this Eurasia idea. Boyce said, because in Japan people started to sleep. When somebody speaks in the East, mostly people close their eyes. And Boyce said, you sleep, just sleep, because what I'm talking about is only happening in the beginning of the 21st century. So I think it is today that we are ready for this, for what I have here behind me. This is the second panel. On the film, you saw the first panel. And so we have 5 panels, and I've written the words that I felt were important from all the different panelists. And I would like to read something from Ilya Prigozhin. So Ilya Prigozhin is the Nobel Prize winner for science. And he says, you need more energy. John Cage says exactly the same. John Cage is also the person who speaks about a basic income. And a basic income and direct democracy, of course, why still have party system? That's a very old, fashioned political system. We have to change to direct democracy, and that is more Cage then, and a basic income for everyone. Prigozhin, you need more energy. You need a multiple views, including art, science, and so on. This traditional idea of civilization was based on violence. The great opportunity of our time is to build up, due to science, a society in which people can participate in culture. It may be science has an important role. It may be responsible for the transition to a global society. Nonlinear science permits us to develop an economy which is no longer based on the exploitation of man by man. It permits creativity and leads to self-organization. The change is absolutely radical. Was that okay to listen to? I mean, understandable? So the change is absolutely radical. And we are right there at that point today.
Yeah. Yeah, there are so many things that do seem to resonate. Self-organization, I mentioned as one of the interests of the new art science fellow at IAS. And clearly there is an understanding of science now as being a more complex activity rather than, automatic sort of beings who are fed a little question and then spit out a yes or no answer in a black and white type system. But again, a much more complex systemic way of looking at things, where we realize that scientists don't just know how, say, COVID is transmitted and need to be, directly involved in designing mitigating measures and so on. But there is always this political system in the middle, as we find it now. And C.S. Steen is asking here what the choice was in the day of not having a government representative or a politician on the panel to engage the system that does sit in the middle.
The system that does sit in the middle is based on that what Boyce's most important answer is. Everybody, everyone is an artist. So it is all about creativity, like Ilya Prigozhin mentions it here, creativity. So Boyce says creativity is the real capital. I think we should see that that is really true, because if you see how the structure that we live in is no longer linear, but is chaotic. Economics is chaotic. The weather is chaotic. In fact, everything is chaotic, and in the chaotic, there is something happening. You can't say when it's happening, but still there is, what do you call it in it? A system. So I think if we don't work more on the basis of creativity, we'll just fall back into very stupid rules. So the most important thing for creativity is that we need to channel creativity. I have written down this because creativity is not used well. If creativity is not used well, it can cause great disturbance. It is important to bring the heart and the mind together in one's whole being. Before you can do a creative act, you have to be one with your loving heart or one with your subtle consciousness. And then with that subtle consciousness, you can act. One more sentence.
Sure.
People have to develop their creativity through art, through science, or through spiritual teachings. So those three pillars of culture are the way for us, because our talents have to be formed one way or the other. You choose yourself. Do I take art? Do I take science? Do I take spirituality to develop? That is very important to see that it's not making money on science or making money on spirituality or on art. No, it's not like that. They're just stepping stones and the pillars of culture. And if you don't, you have them as the pillars of culture, the economic situation takes over, and that's what we are in today.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the interviewees who you had, Raimund Panikar, was pleading for a demonetization of culture.
Yes.
And just also to say, when you say we must, further creativity and so on, he was also quite clear about how creativity is stifled when one tries to control it. So the facilitating is important, but not controlling it, because then it's gone, basically. I thought it was like love in a way, if you want to force it, it kills it in some ways. So when we want to exercise too much control, people are no longer inclined to be creative and responsible themselves, but just fulfill what they feel they have to, tick boxes and so forth. And then all these unintended negative consequences happen, and we keep acting against our better interests or insights, against science and so on, as a giant sort of project almost of self-sabotage. So the insights that your interviewees have brought are so insightful. Bohm, for example, saying, we try to solve problems that have resulted in us.
Yeah, from our own way of thinking.
Yeah, that the thinking was not part of what is happening out there, and so on. So it's very thought-provoking indeed. Mariana, have you kept an eye on the chat a little more, how people are engaging with what we're saying? You're still muted.
Who is muted?
There was here more of a comment, so I will take the chance to ask Louwrien if you can speak a bit more about social sculpture, the concept of social sculpture from Beuys, which is quite a precise idea.
Yes, very.
Yeah, and often also misused or misinterpreted. So I think it would be interesting if you tell a bit what is social sculpture and what it is not.
Who is asking that?
I'm asking.
Oh, you. Okay.
Yeah.
Social sculpture is the most misunderstood thing in the world today. And I always feel so unhappy because people just make something out of it. Social sculpture is that which Joseph Beuys sees when each person lives his or her own creativity. You build a society from that point of view. That is the social sculpture. And Beuys says it is the most important work of art to be made. So it's us changing ourselves into creative beings, listening to each other, talking to each other, words change by the day, words change by the month. We have to talk together to keep ourselves going in a new words and new ways of thinking. So that kind of society is what Beuys sees in front of him. He sees people who communicate, and like Cage says, you breathe better when you are anarchic than you do when you're governed by a government. I think the time of government and of social, what do you call it, political parties is totally gone. It is us, we can think, we can make our own society, and that is the social sculpture. So it's something to go for. If you give it to us, everyone who does it gives it to us. That is the social sculpture. It's not something like sending artists to the people to help. No, it is all of us. An anarchic way of living.
Yeah, I suppose you mean also responsible for the liberties of the next person and so on.
It's as the Dalai Lama said, compassionate.
Compassionate, indeed.
With a warm heart.
Yeah.
From competition to compassion was what came out of the first panel.
Yeah, lovely.
That competition part is nice, but we've had it. We're not for the compassionate society.
Yeah. And Bohm also said that economics meant household. Yeah,
household, yes, economics means household. Everyone around the table should eat. So that is the household idea. And that is also why this the basic income is so important. And probably it will be much less expensive to give everyone money, because that money will flow. It will flow, Beuys says, like a bloodstream through society. Why don't we do that?
There are certainly elements of that kind of thinking that have reached broad acceptance in a way. When people in many governments are talking about everybody needing to be vaccinated, not just, you know, the rich or those in wealthy countries or those on various lists, first of all, but everybody, so that, the world, the household can fulfill its functions and show itself to be as mutually connected as it is. So we know that the world is connected in so many more ways than it seemed to us before.
Well, I'm happy that Mariana came to Food is the Future, because that whole thing that is happening is because we have forgotten that our food makes our way of thinking, and that what we eat is where the future is. Beuys said to me, Louwrien, never start to speak about food because people get mad at you. Well, you know, it's true that that is a difficult subject, but my idea has always been grains, vegetables, beans, then you don't have to kill, you don't have to do anything wrong to anyone. And so I've eaten that way since 27 years of age, and I'm now 80. And anyway.
Works well.
What?
It works well, we can see.
Yeah, it's worth a try, you know. But, yes, a completely different kind of society, the real social sculpture, has all these different aspects, including food.
Yeah, and Sharmila is addressing this aspect as well, I think, in remarking that women need to make this change happen and men need to support it. and women know in their bodies and brains and hearts and everything what is right. There were very few women on your panels, but it did seem to be compassionate thought as something that, well, somebody like Hélène Sixou, I'm looking for a feminist term here, would call écriture féminine, applying it to James Joyce's writings. Men can also think in feminist ways, I mean to say. So how would you think that women needed to be included if the events happened now?
Women have always been included. I mean, we come from the matriarchal society, which we had to get rid of because of the Romans when they started to make women inferior. And those times are over. So let's get back to our normal places in life. Women, when you give something into the hands of women, it will be guarded for, and it will be, you will still have it later on. It will be rescued. So women you can trust, you can give culture into their hands, and the men are their advisors. That is the original way of living. The Celts still had it, and they say we still have it here on the islands in the Waddenzee. They still have the old matriarchal society. I think we have come very, very near. And then the fact that, yes, there were very little women in the 5 panels in the Stedelijk Museum. It was almost impossible to find women at that time. And often it was said by somebody in the audience, I said, well, you know, I'm a woman. So I think the fact that I could do this shows already that feminism, it is already here.
Yeah, so it is definitely a facilitating practice, an empathic one that you modeled with these events, you know, discussing the important questions in society, science, and spirituality. And to consider that as an artwork, then all sorts of instituting activities can be considered to be art. I mean, you already mentioned Beuys's dictum that everybody is an artist, but what might that mean? As somebody working in a university, I do see instituting practices as possible also. You know, that doesn't all exist in fixed reglementen, rules and things. Certain things can be changed, can be creatively engaged with, a little institutional dance, sometimes a choreography for other kinds of practices and thought. So I think that Beuys was also right in a way, not just to tell his gallerist Richard DiMarco he should leave the white cube. I was talking about the white cube earlier already as this sort of supposedly apart, neutral place, but also to remain within the museum. Not that many artists did that at the time. You would call that a new institutionalism now, or an experimental institutionalism. I think that many of the scientists, spiritual leaders, and artists who you spoke with have that kind of an experimentally institutional outlook. Do you see it that way? Because that wasn't the vocabulary yet in 1990.
Yeah, the whole institutionalization of things, of whatever subject it is scary. So therefore, I'm very much in favor of creativity. What is creativity? It is another level. So if non-duality, you can describe things up to non-duality. Here, your 6th chakra. But that part where you're no longer able to say even your name, that part is where creativity works. If we would give many more people the possibility to work with their subtle consciousness and just work from subtle consciousness, then we would create a completely different world. And yes, institutionalization goes from here, all the chakras here, because that is the learning and the putting it in order. But if you want to get to the social sculpture as we see it and to the real creativity, you have to give much more space to the subtle consciousness. And subtle consciousness is when you don't exactly know why you're doing something, but you're doing it. And then, aha, when you've done it, you see, oh, maybe a next step is possible. So it's a very insecure way. Art gives that experience of general uncertainty, John Cage. They never have enough time. They work day and night, completely involved in their work. They require no vacations. I think essentially, people are this way. They know perfectly well what to do with their time if they are left anarchic. This is what my heart tells me for the future.
Louwrien, I'm going to read the comments from the chat that you partially just answered, but maybe you can continue on that thinking. And it's from Esme Gerken, and she says it's very inspiring, and it indeed resonates. On a geological time scale, 30 years is just a glimpse, of course. Hearing more about your events really encourages me in the conversations, symposia I'm organizing between artists and scientists. Also inspired by spirituality as part of my ES Art Science Fellowship. I'm wondering if you think it would be good to allow more entropy in our thinking by sometimes letting go of our collective human ego. Do you think that if we feel part of the environment again, like David Bohm said, this will lead to making other choices?
It would lead to making other choices. Then other choices, then what?
Then, well, I think the ones that brought us where we are right now. And what she's saying that I also find it really interesting is when we see these talks in the 90s. Of course, in the 90s, you were all thinking about the future, which we could consider today, let's say, 30 years from then. But what we see today is that we are more or less in the same stage, or perhaps even a much worse. But yeah, in geological times, this 30 years is nothing. So we are almost, in the same place.
Yeah, but still, that moment, what I say, boys, what I say is only happening in the beginning of the 21st century. Very funny. You feel now you can't not do it anymore. You have to do it. We have to change. So the ego, let your ego go, what the remark she made is, of course, the most beautiful one. Because why do you need an ego?
Yeah.
If you think of compassionate economy, if I take less, others have more. That is the way we are thinking today. If I take less, others have more.
Yeah, a very generous outlook this proposes. And also to return to the non-binary point that you made earlier, Louwrien, I think it's very important to focus on the wisdom that these scientists have actually imparted on us. There was nothing binary, there was nothing, boxy or kind of simplistic about what they were saying. And yet in the centenary year of Joseph Beuys's birth, we are often now confronted with people saying, oh, but he was a mysticist and therefore an anti-rational, anti-enlightenment sort of a person, and therefore he was still a fascist, and all of these kinds of things. People are looking just for black and white answers, for ticking a box that says this way or that way. Yeah, and these insights that you have presented basically on the foundation of Beuys's social sculpture thinking show really very different priorities, very different ways of approaching things. So if I say, which I do, that if we had listened to Beuys, then the present and the future would look different. We should listen to how this artistic researcher basically managed to look into the future in this way. You know, how that what he was proposing was so foresightful. There is no space really for condemning him as the forever German soldier or something like that. And working in memory studies, the research school that I lead, Amsterdam School for Heritage, Memory and Material Culture, there are people who are working in perpetrator studies. Yeah, one also needs to look at the perpetrators, not in order to now think that what they did was wonderful, but in order to prevent what they did from happening again. So as somebody who had a very personal insight, practical one, I suppose, into the evil of the 20th century, he could analyze better probably than maybe somebody who has had the privilege of growing up in peacetime and never having to make these choices, and yet sometimes making the choices that you know, we hear, listen on the television and so on. Anti-fascism is something that is rife. Yeah, white supremacy, people in high positions like the former American president condemning anti-fascism somehow, as if the 20th century had not happened. So all of this very muddled thinking is clarified in such complex ways as these interlocutors of yours presented that to us.
Yeah, I always think negativity you should avoid, because it brings so many wrong things. It is really, try to never think negative. And by chance, I have been alive during the war, and a bomb fell on our house. So I know what the ruins of the war are. And my father said, okay, the war is over. That was May 45. Let's never speak about the war again, because everything that will be said will be wrong. And so we went back to there was no difference between German and Dutch and whatever kind of people. So I'm very happy that I could have that upbringing. And I think that normally we should just not be negative about anything, and to be negative about Beuys. People tell me lots of things, but it is not true. It is, let's see it as it is. He has given us a very, very, when I start, oh yeah, I had to start a Green Party in Holland for Beuys. You start the Green Party with Roel van Duin, he said. Well, we did, you know. And then we had somebody from England. And what is this place that he was coming from? Glastonbury, from Glastonbury. He came with us to the meetings, and he said, why do you mention Steiner so often here? You have Beuys. And that's exactly how I see it. Beuys is the second step it is a new step. So let's think that having had him and following his ideas, for me, it's been incredibly good. So why wouldn't it be good for all of us? Everybody an artist. It is so easy and it's so
Yeah,
much better.
it gives us a responsibility. I mean, as an academic, I can't necessarily agree with don't go into the past anymore. The past also does need to be analyzed and
Yes,
used to
of course.
guide the future.
And the past is lovely to spend time in, but it's the steps that, yeah, it is the steps in the future. That is what is important. How do we get there to that other kind of society, to
Yeah.
a healthy, happy world?
Yeah. Raphael Jeune is asking, what should we do to allow us all to develop their subtle consciousness and then let our basic creativity express?
Yeah, the subtle consciousness. Very, very sweet that you ask that. Beautiful. So, yes, we have we have a freedom to live our own talents. We have talents, but we very often don't know what our talents are. But to be able to know what your talents are, you have to go inside and close off. Don't go outside all the time. You go inside and you see all kinds of figures and things coming. That is when you go into your subtle consciousness. Your
Okay.
subtle consciousness comes in when you go to bed and you sleep. Your subconsciousness becomes more and more subtle all the time until you go into deep sleep. In deep sleep, you experience an enlightenment, a complete enlightenment, which you will forget. But every night, your mind goes through an enlightened moment in deep sleep. Then, slowly, slowly, you build up your consciousness again, and you forget about the depths that you have gone into in your deep sleep. But there are answers in your mind. You wake up and you have answers suddenly. So that is thanks to your very, very subtle mind. And of course, your most subtle mind you will experience in death. When you die, 2.5 days, you'll be in a very, very, very subtle mind. So yes, the subtle mind, I would say, let's study it. Let's do it more. Let's just know that it is there. And you cannot say this is this color and that is this color. There you can't say anything. So it's a kind of meditation, but it's even less
Yeah.
meditation is even more material than this.
Many of the panelists in 1990 said something about the world speeding up and all this sort of hectic lifestyle and the commercialization of everything and how we live a derivative life instead of one rooted in nature and where that kind of retreat into one's own thought world is possible. Now that we live in a moment when we do need to retreat in order to keep ourselves safe and others. Of course, that's not always positive, but maybe it can give moments when we take this as an invitation to go into ourselves, lock out all that speed and maybe not even have the screen in front of our eyes all the time, like now. Everything has opportunities, affordances, So maybe this new necessity to spend more time with ourselves could also be an invitation to go further, and to take that into education. Not seeing my students is very hard indeed, but Jeroen Luther says that he encourages his students to work without a curriculum and work as a teacher and an artwork and so on. Do you recognize that?
I
Yes,
recognize that immediately. Yes, I do. I think we should let, originally we looked at children and we didn't say you have to do this or you have to go to school or you have, no, a child would come up with ideas and say to the parents, hey, this, or they would find out, oh, he would like this and she would like that. That is, I think, how we should educate our children. We shouldn't push them into rhythms or into schemes. Also, the next education at the middle age, when you're a little bit older.
yeah,
I think what we do is we learn from other people. So if there is not this communication, mind direct, if I don't see your face and your face does not answer me, because the words, that is only 40% of our communication. And
yeah,
the rest of the communication is mind direct and through our face.
mm,
So I always say I would like to live in the time of Rembrandt, work with Rembrandt, see how his face moves when I make something, because then you have a direct connection with your teacher. I wish we would go back to that time where a teacher and a student exchange. And of course, Robert Filliou also speaks about this teacher and student. Robert Filliou says, when I speak, I'm the teacher. When you speak, I'm the student.
yeah.
So I also like that way of looking at it.
Yeah, indeed, lovely. In the Q&A, Wim Kok is drawing our attention to chaosmos and Deleuze and Guattari and non-linear thought and so forth. But Mariana and I would take chaosmos back to James Joyce. It's a word in Finnegan's Wake. It's a bit earlier than Deleuze and Guattari, 1939. So when we see literature something creative, yeah, fictional, investigate how chaos and cosmos interact by making this portmanteau word chaosmos. You could write 10 pages and wouldn't really grasp what this simple little word actually already has in it. Um, it's a nice thing to reflect on.
Very nice, yes.
And rhizomatic thought, of course, also as a response to 1968 and how one would institute otherwise, how one could avoid hierarchical structures and so forth. A root that starts growing at different points simultaneously instead of a linear sequence. These are the kinds of complexities of how things actually work and can be observed in ways that may not be immediately um, yeah evident to somebody who just looks for very simplistic answers, but it can give us a lot more yeah to chew on, I suppose. But we do need to be prepared for coping with uncertainty if we take on board these kinds of yeah,
Yeah, the uncertainty will, of course, go as soon as we pay a basic income to everyone. Because
yeah,
it's that whole idea of salary and salary slaves that
yeah,
I have avoided my whole life. I didn't want to have a salary. I thought people will know what to do, will tell you what to do. No, I didn't want that. So I know you can live without a salary. You have to be aware of where it comes from all the time, the next money, but you can live without a salary. And I think this salary-less community, but with a direct, with a, hoe heet dat ook weer? Een
Basic
basic
income.
income. With a basic,
Louwrien,
yes.
on that note, I wanted to also make another question from the audience, which is, give me a sec. So she says, Rosie, she's saying, so inspired to hear you. And how do you think, Louwrien, we could help our governments to see that basic universal income would not be expensive or make people lazy?
Exactly. Yeah, we have to do it. In fact, of course, I've been talking about basic income also with the 100 Days Boys that we did here. In fact, in the East, they're more advanced in thinking in basic income terms than we in the West are. So funnily, we should actually speak about it and start it. You can't start it in small groups. That is what everybody now is suggesting. Crazy. You have to start with a bigger or worldwide, much better. We have to start doing it. It's not all that difficult, really.
Basic democracy.
Yeah.
Ah, yeah, and then direct democracy, Egon.
Yes,
In my
of
ear.
course.
So if
Yeah.
you have direct democracy,
Mm.
and you have a basic, because the two things fit together. Huh? Direct democracy means you can think what the problem is and you give your own answer. Nobody has to speak for you. Volksvertegenwoordiger, very old-fashioned. So, you know, if we have that direct democracy, then the basic income fits. It's a new system. Just do it. Let's just start working on it. That whole thing in The Hague here in Holland and in London and in Washington, you see that it withers away already.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I feel it.
Yeah, and some of the richest people in the world who made their fortune on the basis of, say, IT companies and so on are also beginning to support this idea because they see how, chance gave them all of this and how much administration and so on is wasted on giving these people a little and those people a little bit more. And then we have the toeslagenaffaire and
Exactly.
Stretches the Rechtsstaat, law and order, put this into bureaucratic hands. Now, Raymond Panica, who you interviewed.
I'm
also.
so happy that you mentioned his name now for the second time already.
Yeah, well, I made some notes here and he just keeps
Raymond
popping
Panica is a beauty.
Yeah, he said how strange it was actually to even monetize food. Human beings from
Of course.
that
is why economy is called household.
Yeah, that the earth makes, and native Indians and so forth, American Indians, don't consider a river or land as something that a human being can or should own. So maybe to draw from these various ideas does not sound like such a bad thing in our situation. Well, there is another comment from Jeroen Luthers who says, should the COVID crisis not be an important momentum to make the next move towards this new system instead of next or Brexit salary exit starting 1st of January 22? Yeah, indeed. I think that is sort of the the moment that we were going towards in our discussion. I look at the clock and it says 5:30
Oh,
already.
that's it.
Yeah, the time has flown. So I think I need to, yeah, make us wrap up. And thank you certainly for
Thank
the
you for the beautiful questions from who were listening and
yeah,
remarks.
and thank you for your thoughtful answers and for really bringing this moment, this collaborative venture of all of these artists, spiritual leaders, and scientists into the present day. I think to have it based as a history in Amsterdam also conjures the notion that science, as we use it in sort of Dutch English speech, is not really what English native speakers would call science as such. It's not just natural science, it's academic work in general, and moving into artistic research also, that this is a larger frame that we're talking about. And as an artwork, I think this stands really at the beginning of what I would very much like to what I would like art science at IIS to be about.
Oh, that would be beautiful. So
Yeah.
let's start there. But true, it is time to do these things, and this whole COVID thing shows that this was the limit, and now we have to jump.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And
Thank
all
you.
the attendees looking at a screen for so long.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
Mariana. Thanks to IIS. Have a very good day.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks,
Thank
Louwrien.
you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.